Thank you for tuning in this evening for the Fort Benn Chamber Sheriff's Candidates Forum. My name is Rehan Ali Mohammed. I'm a partner in the law office of Wong Fleming, and I'm the immediate past chairman for the Fort Benn Chamber of Commerce, and I will be your moderator for this evening. This event is being broadcasted through Facebook Live through both the Fort Benn Chamber of Commerce's Facebook page. If you have questions for our candidates, please submit them in the comment section through the Zoom page or on the Fort Benn Chamber Facebook page. We will do our best to get to as many questions as time allowed. This will be a timed response forum. Paige Talbot will be the timekeeper. You will have 1 minute to answer each question. Candidates will receive a reminder for 30 seconds remaining, 10 seconds remaining, and stop. Each candidate will be given 1 minute each for an opening statement and a 2-minute closing statement. Do you understand the rules?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Let's begin with our introductions. Our candidates for Fort Benn Sheriff are Trevor Nels, Eric Fagan. Candidates, you will have 1 minute for your opening statement. Per the rules, we'll go in order of your name on the ballot. Trevor Nels, please give us your opening statement.
Good evening. My name is Trevor Nels, and I am a candidate for sheriff. I want to begin by thanking the Fort Benn Chamber of Commerce for hosting this forum and my opponent, Eric Fagan, for participating. Most importantly, I want to thank the viewers for spending time with us this evening to learn more about your sheriff candidates. My goal tonight is to highlight my qualifications and plans as your next sheriff, and point out some fundamental differences between my opponent and I. I am uniquely qualified to serve as your sheriff. I have over 27 years of law enforcement experience in Fort Benn County, the past 8 years as your constable for Precinct 4. Additionally, I served our country in the U.S. Army Reserve for the past 32 years and hold the rank of colonel. I respectfully request you to consider my years of service right here in Fort Benn County, including my years of supervisory and management experience of law enforcement officers. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric Fagan, please give us your opening statement.
Thank you. And I would like to reiterate what my opponent said. Thank the Fort Benn Chamber of Commerce for having us here. And thank you, viewers there at home watching us here today. This important forum is important for you to find out who you want to be your next Fort Benn County Sheriff. And don't let me neglect to thank my opponent also for being here this evening, Constable Trevor Nels. Look, I've been in Fort Benn County for over 29 years. I've worked in law enforcement for over 34 years. Also, I have unique abilities, qualification, and education to be your next Fort Benn County Sheriff. There are stark differences between myself and my opponent. We're here tonight to talk about the issues. We want you to call in with questions, write in with questions, whatever you need to do to find out who you want to be your next Fort Benn County Sheriff. I thank you. I wish everyone well, and God bless.
Thank you. Let me begin with the first question. Candidates, you will have 1 minute each to answer the questions. The recently completed Operation Patriot led to 46 arrests and 5 victims rescued from a human trafficking operation in Missouri City and Stafford. What future measures will you take to eradicate human trafficking? Mr. Nels, you're first.
Well, we will work very aggressively against anyone that conducts any type of sex operations in our county. The Fort Benn County Sheriff's Office currently has a crime prevention program that addresses many of the issues that we're dealing with today. And with respect to human trafficking, the Sheriff's Office has a 24/7 hotline, and it's a local number, a 281-341-3800 number, in addition to 2 detectives assigned for human or sex trafficking. Additionally, the Fort Benn County Sheriff's Office has a detective assigned for internet crimes against children. So as your next sheriff, we will look at the statistical data that comes into Fort Benn County, address any issues in a very proactive manner in Fort Benn County to ensure our children, and all people are safe in Fort Bend County.
Thank you. Mr. Fagan, your response?
Yes, that's a very important question, and thank you for asking it. Our current sheriff had made a statement that human trafficking didn't exist in Fort Bend. As you see, that is not true. I will work along with our DA, our current DA, who headed that operation to arrest those 46 members. Human trafficking is something that is in all our counties. We can't hide that. As your next sheriff, I will work alongside the DA, the county judge, and other law enforcement agencies to stop this blight in our county. We must work together, no matter Republican or Democrat. We all should work together to stop this. Human trafficking affects not only the person in the human trafficking, but family members, the family members of these individuals. Not only women, what a lot of people think, but it also home workers, children also. So we must do all we can to stop this blight. I'm Eric Fagan, and I will do it as your next sheriff.
Thank you. Next question. Do you believe improvements are needed to law enforcement at the county level? If so, what changes would you look to oversee as county sheriff? Mr. Fagan, you're first.
One change I want to make at Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office is I want to lower the jail capacity in our county jails. What I mean by this is this. On the other side, they try to make it seem like Democrats are soft on crime. That isn't true. What I'm talking about doing is being smart policing. People who are being arrested for minor offenses that could get a Class C ticket, we could give them a ticket instead of putting them in jail. Putting them in jail, you're paying for their fines, for their housekeeping, for paying a deputy to watch them and being housed and medical. If we give them a ticket, statistics shows they'll come back to pay that fine. We must do things to lower the jail population. Also being more proactive in all manners of law enforcement. As your next sheriff, I will do this.
Thank you, Mr. Fagan. Mr. Nels, your response.
You know, that is a great question. And there, you speak of improvements, and there's always room for improvement. Within any organization, you strive to do the best you can. So there can be improvements with respect to the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Department. However, I must say there is great collaboration that exists between the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office and all law enforcement agencies in Fort Bend County. And I think that collaboration is a reason that Fort Bend County is ranked #2 of the 254 counties in the state of Texas with respect to a desirable place to live. Fort Bend County is a great place to live. If I speak of a specific improvement with the Sheriff's Office, we'll continue to analyze the data about the mental health issues facing Fort Bend County, our state, and our country. And we'll take some analysis, take the data, analyze it, and ascertain, do we need to increase the number of CIT deputies that respond to those in crisis? And if so, it'll be one of my top priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nels. Next question. What measures would you support to improve communication between county law enforcement agencies? Mr. Nels, you're first.
I sort of just answered that question. You know, I did over 20 years with the Sugar Land Police Department, and I've served as the Precinct 4 Constable for the past 8 years. And I work hand in hand with other law enforcement agencies throughout Fort Bend County, whether it's Chief Eric Robbins with Sugar Land Police or Mike Berezin with Missouri City. You could name Gary Stewart, Meadows Place, all the different agencies in Fort Bend County, because we have good collaboration. We're there to assist each other. And I think that collaboration is extremely important because criminals know no boundaries. They don't know if they're in Missouri City, Sugar Land, Stafford, and that crosstalk and collaboration is extremely important. And I think we have that in Fort Bend County. And as the constable for the past 8 years, I've ensured that crosstalk and that communication. In fact, it was recent where we worked with Missouri City on a case, and it was solved within 24 hours as a result of that collaboration.
Thank you. Mr. Fagan, your response.
Yes, law enforcement need to collaborate, but we need to work with our top law enforcement official here in Fort Bend, the district attorney. Currently, that's not happening. We must work with all law enforcement agencies. I've been in law enforcement over 34 years. I've made connections with the FBI, Homeland Security, also with different police chiefs surrounding the area. Collaboration is important. We need to work together. It's not a one-man show. The constables, the sheriffs, and municipalities should all work together. Right now, there is a conflict between the sheriff's office and some constables' division. We need to stop that. Politics shouldn't be in law enforcement. Law enforcement should be about protecting the individuals living in our county. As sheriff, I will work with anyone, Republican, Democrat, Independent. It doesn't matter. Your safety comes first.
Thank you, Mr. Fagan. Next question. On a scale of 1 to 10, where would you place as a priority providing body cameras for all sheriff department deputies? Please share your thoughts on whether body cameras for deputies should or should not be a priority. Mr. Fagan, you're first.
It should be a priority. Right now, I'm shocked to say, and sorry to say, currently at the Sheriff's Department, the patrol division deputies do not have body cameras. And we can't blame that on the Commissioner's Court. We have to act just like other law enforcement agencies do. You request a federal grant for these body cameras. That would be one of my first initiatives. I want body cameras because they also protect the officer and the citizens as well. This is something we can use to help both parties. So as your sheriff, that would be one of my first priorities, to make sure all patrol deputies has body cameras.
Thank you, Mr. Fagan. Mr. Nels, your response.
Before I answer that question, I want to bring up a good point. And the point is that I am not the current Fort Bend County Sheriff. I am a candidate for Fort Bend County Sheriff. And Eric, on your responses, I would respectfully request that you look at me as a candidate for Fort Bend County Sheriff and not the current Fort Bend County Sheriff. With respect to body cameras, I am the Precinct 4 Constable and have been for 8 years, and my office has body cameras. Body cameras are essential in today's law enforcement field. It's critical that each and every deputy at the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Department has a body camera. It will be one of my first initiatives on January 1st when elected as your sheriff. I will work with our Commissioner's Court on funding. In fact, I believe there's works in the place right now to secure funding for body-worn cameras. But what I'm here to tell your viewers is my deputies do wear body cameras, and it'll be my first priority once I'm elected as your sheriff.
Thank you, Mr. Nels. Next question. The Houston Chronicle released an editorial earlier this year regarding the Fort Bend County Narcotics Task Force, which is overseen by the Sheriff's Office. The editorial was written in response to a Chronicle investigation that found the task force disproportionately stops Latino drivers. Do you believe there is a problem with racial profiling, and is there anything you would do to change the task force's practices? Mr. Nels, you're first.
As your next sheriff, I will not tolerate any form of racial profiling or discrimination. I have not as constable, nor will I as your next sheriff. Now, I'm familiar with the Houston Chronicle article about the profiling against Hispanics. Let me just throw out one statistical tidbit of information for you. The Sheriff's Office 2019 Racial Profiling Report conducted 22,990 traffic stops. 15% of those 22,990 traffic stops were Hispanic or Latino. Now, the 2018 census study indicated Fort Bend County Hispanic Latino population is 21% of the over 800,000 residents that call Fort Bend County home. So you have 21% of the population and 15% of the traffic stops conducted by the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Department. But what I am here to tell you is I will not tolerate any racial profiling, period.
Thank you. Mr. Fagan, your response.
As your next sheriff, I will not tolerate racial profiling. It starts from the top. You have to put policies in place that states racial profiling is zero tolerance on that. Look, statistics also show in Fort Bend, you're 8 times likely to be stopped in traffic if you're African American. 3 times more likely if you're stopped, if you are or of the Hispanic culture. This problem has been going on for a long time in Fort Benn County. We must change it. You can't say that there's a problem of racial profiling and you're going to stop it, and you never came out to say anything about it when the issue came out in the Houston Chronicle. I'm the only candidate that came out and made a statement against this. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that my opponent is racist in any shape or form. He's a Christian man and a good man. I believe that. But I believe I'm the right person for this job to take on that issue.
Thank you, sir. Next question. How will you reduce the rate of unsolved crime in Fort Benn? Mr. Fagan, you're first.
By this. Look, investigation divisions must do their own investigations, their own jobs. What I mean about that is this. A person in the burglary division shouldn't work on a homicide case. A person in homicide shouldn't work on an auto theft case. We have to divide the responsibilities of these individuals. Right now in Fort Benn County, I've been told that there are officers in investigative divisions that has over 70 folders of cases on their desk because they don't have time to do their exact, precise job. I want to change that. I've worked in law enforcement. I've worked in different divisions. I understand how investigations are how to be solved and what it takes to do that. They need to do one job and do that one job well. As your sheriff, I will make a point of that. So elect me to be your next Fort Benn County Sheriff, and we will bring down the crime.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Nels, your response.
With respect to reducing the rate of unsolved crime, I will say this about the Fort Benn County Sheriff's Department and the 826 fine employees, both men and women, from patrol to detectives to IT to CIT, you name it. Community-oriented policing is about results. And today in Fort Benn County, burglaries are down 60%, robberies are down 31%, and aggravated assaults are down 27%. So for our viewers this evening, do you feel safe and secure in Fort Benn County? Do you see a need for any form of change at the Fort Benn County Sheriff's Department? I feel the relationship that's been developed for the past 28 years with my service in Fort Benn County has proven positive and proven effective, which is why so many people call Fort Benn County home, and 25,000 residents move into Fort Benn County each and every year because it's a great place to live.
Thank you, sir. Next question. How would you ensure the proper implementation of a whistleblower policy? Mr. Nels, you're first.
There are policies at my office as the Precinct 4 Constable that allow them to report any type of what they consider immoral, unethical, or illegal behavior by any of the employees of the Precinct 4 Constable's office. I believe that policy is very widespread throughout Fort Benn County because the fact is nobody should ever tolerate any form of prejudice against someone that reports something that may be warranted or may be considered, I cannot believe you did so. So as your next sheriff, there will be open door policies through the chain of command all the way up to me as your next sheriff. If there are any issues where an employee feels the sheriff's office is not being run in an efficient and professional manner, and I assure you, my office door will always be open.
Thank you. Mr. Fagan, your response.
Look, we must open the doors of law enforcement to the public and make the officers, deputies feel like they must report wrongdoing. When you ask a question like that, it's very important. It brings me back to what happened to Mr. Floyd. There were 5 officers there. All of those officers did wrong, but none of those officers reported on the other officers. We must put policies in place to let the deputies know when they see a fellow officer doing something wrong, they must act, and they will not be protected because they're a deputy. Bad officers make it hard for good officers. So as your next sheriff, I will put policies in place that informs all the deputies there that if you see a deputy doing something wrong, by law, you must report it. By policy, I'm sorry, you must report it. So as your next sheriff, this is what I will do.
Thank you, sir. Next question. What behaviors have you seen in your leadership that were clues to you that one or more officers under your ranks were in mental and emotional distress, and how have you handled it? Without names, obviously. Mr. Fagan, you're first.
My master's in juvenile forensic psychology. To get that master's, I had to do an internship with a licensed psychiatrist where I actually did psychological evaluations on individuals before they went to court in Harris County. I have hands-on experience in this. I'm the only candidate in this race that has that. We must look at mental illness as that, an illness, like any other illness. And we must train our deputies and the CIT deputies more training. They need much more training to recognize what mental illness is. Like self-taught. What that means is this. When a deputy comes in contact with somebody who's suffering mental illness and they give them directives and that individual eyes is out in space, they're sometimes hearing auditory hallucinations. We need to train these officers about this. As your next sheriff, I will institute this training.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Nels, your response.
Again, I want to ensure all the viewers this evening that Mr. Fagan keeps bringing up things that aren't necessarily truthful because they currently take place at the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Department. For example, the recent use of force policy. I believe everybody across our country, every police officer across our country saw what happened with Mr. Floyd, and they put their head down and think, I cannot believe I just witnessed that. There's no officer that would justify that type of activity or action. But within the current Fort Bend County Sheriff's Department and offices throughout Fort Bend County, there's a policy that went into effect October 1st, and it's called duty to intervene. And it proactively addresses, for example, if an officer sees another officer using excessive force, it will not be tolerated. If an officer sees a supervisor using excessive force, it will not be tolerated. But back to the question about the, my office had a recent incident where one of my deputies.
Well, let me stop you there. You run out of time, but the next question is related, so you'll be able to continue that. Okay.
I just want to make sure I have a time to rebut Mr. Fagan on what I think may be some inconsistencies with what he says.
Well, we're giving equal time. I'm sure you'll be able to address it with the next one if you want to.
Very well.
The next question is related. Like I said, many officers do not get mental health counseling until they retire. How will you ensure officers get timely and ongoing access to mental health support? Mr. Nels.
That's a great segue into this question, and I thank you for it. It's very, very good. If, for those that live in Fort Bend County, we had a very tragic incident take place in late May here in Fort Bend County where one of my deputies was shot and killed. Now, that is a very traumatic experience for the community, family, the offices involved, the police agencies involved, and I'm proud of the way my deputies, my employees responded and reacted in that tragedy because it was horrific and no law enforcement leader should ever have to go through it. But here in Fort Bend County, I am proud to say that we respond as a team and as a family. There's a behavioral health services here in Fort Bend County that allows officers or deputies to visit for counseling, grief counseling with their families, by the way. And that's taking place throughout Fort Bend County. Even through the CISM team, many of the local churches come together where the pastors, priests throughout the communities come together to assist officers in need with mental health.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Fagan, your response.
Yes. Mr. Trevor had made two statements that I was untruthful about something. I don't know what I said to make him think I said something that was untruthful. But when it comes to mental illness, I am the only candidate in this race with that education. If I'm elected as your sheriff, blessed to be elected as your next Fort Bend County sheriff, I will put in place where officers, where deputies will have a psychological evaluation on a quarterly basis if they want to come in. We have to work with these institutions of mental health to get them to open their doors to our offices. This protects the deputies and also the public. Look, law enforcement is very stressful. We have the highest rate of divorce, one of the highest rates of suicide. We can't be blinded by this and just say we can talk to one another. No, they need professional help, and we have to reach out to these organizations for it. As your next sheriff, I will do that.
Thank you, sir. All right. Next question. In your opinion, does the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Department practice community policing? How can local officers promote positive community policing and minimize use of force? Mr. Fagan, you're first.
As the president of the second largest union, I reached out to the public and had community outreach. Community policing in Houston started when Lee Brown became the police chief. I was there. I'm gonna bring community policing to Fort Bend. Look, I'm not saying that we don't have it right now, but I'm saying we must have better community policing. Currently at the Sheriff's Department, minorities in command positions on the command staff, it's hard to find. We must change that. Children need to see people who look like them in those positions. That will bring them more comfort as well. We must reach out to the public and open the doors. I plan to have a citizen review board, if elected as your next sheriff, where we will have people from all faith and different Republicans, Democrats, Independents alike to come, sit down, and we work together to solve problems for this county.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Nels, your response.
There are multiple community policing initiatives in Fort Bend County, and I'll name a few for our viewers. One being Kids and Cops. So if you're in the unincorporated areas of Fort Bend County and you've had a child for the last 10, 12 years here in Fort Bend County, they probably participated with Kids and Cops. And the Kids and Cops is a great program held by the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Department with officers uniquely qualified on dealing with some of our youth. They hold summer camps each and every summer, and it's a very highly acclaimed, sought-after program. Additionally, we have a House Watch program. We collaborate with homeowners associations because that's really where the bread and butter is. When you meet with the homeowners associations on a weekly basis to get an idea of their concerns, how do they feel each and every night in their neighborhoods? Another program is the Citizens Police Academy, which is conducted twice a year at the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Department, a 10-week program. We just recently experienced National Night Out here in Fort Bend County, another great program, the You Are Not Alone program. And if I had another 30 to 45 seconds, I'd be able to discuss all the programs, but there's great community-oriented policing in Fort Bend County.
Thank you. All right, next question. It has been said that mental illness is the greatest issue for law enforcement in Fort Bend County. Without adequate resources in the county to help individuals with mental illness, the county jails are left housing people who are law-abiding citizens battling mental illness, not criminals. What is your plan to deal with this issue? Mr. Nails, you're first.
And that's a great question about mental health. So mental health in Fort Bend County, we know it's an issue in our communities, in our county, across our state, and across our nation. And it should be bothersome for any American realizing the gravity of the situation with mental health. In fact, this past week, we had 3 people commit suicide in one day here in Fort Bend County. But there's a crisis intervention team in Fort Bend County, and it was formed in 2014. And it consists of 12 personnel specifically trained to deal with people in a crisis, a mental health crisis. Now, that crisis intervention team in Fort Bend County works with all the law enforcement agencies in Fort Bend County, and not specific to the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Department. It's for all law enforcement agencies in Fort Bend County. And they work with public-private partnerships, including Texana, Fort Bend County Behavioral Health Services, and other community partners. But remember this, to all the viewers, the Fort Bend County Jail should not be a mental health institution. There should be jail diversion programs to prevent mental health people or those in a crisis from being put in the Fort Bend County Jail.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Fagan, your response.
As I said before, I'm the only candidate in this race that has the hands-on experience dealing with mental illness. Look, a lot of people don't know this. When a mentally ill person comes into crisis, if that person can get his medication within 72 hours to bring them down. Right now in Fort Benn County, we do have a diversion court system for mental illness. What I want to do is upgrade the training of CIT with the sheriff's office so deputies can recognize what mental illness looks like. Look, we have seen across America where officers has killed people who are mentally ill because they didn't recognize what they were seeing. As your next sheriff, I will mandate that officers get the training that is needed and work with the different organizations like Texana to bring mental illness down, not bring mental illness down, but bring the escalations with the officers down with mentally ill people.
Thank you. All right, next question. The Fort Benn County Commissioners Court appointed a committee last year to review the 911 dispatch operations in the Sheriff's Office. The report was titled 911 Communications Division Best Practices Gap Analysis. It identified several issues that needed to be resolved. Do you believe the 911 issues have been resolved, and how will you monitor and address issues that arise in the future? Mr. Fagan, you're first.
I'm glad you asked that question. And you must realize that was an independent organization that did that. It was nonpartisan, and they did find some deficiencies. Back in January 1st of 2019, a memo policy went out from the Sheriff's Department to the dispatch system that is run under the Sheriff's Office, that all 911 calls will be not given to contract deputies, but sent to the sheriff deputies. Now, let me ask you this. If someone is breaking into your home, does it matter to you which officer gets there first? That would be the first thing what I'll do as your sheriff on day one, is to rescind that policy. And to say that there's no change, there's no difference in the policy, that they have the same radio, they hear the same thing, then why make that change in the first place?
Thank you. Mr. Nels, your response.
I want to educate Eric a little bit on this with respect to dispatch times. Number one, there's no issues with dispatch times at my constable's office. If you talk to the precinct 1 constable, if you talk to the precinct 2 constable. Right now, dispatch is dispatched through the Fort Benn County Sheriff's Office. There are 3 police channels and 2 fire channels, and they're operated 24/7. The memo that Mr. Fagan references is a 2019 memo that directed dispatch to dispatch 2 Fort Benn County Sheriff's deputies that are in that primary district. But I want the viewers to understand, the constables, even my constables, are listening to the exact same radio traffic. In fact, the 2018 and 2019 analysis indicated that by dispatching the 2 Fort Benn County Sheriff's deputies, yet allowing and offering the Fort Benn County constables, whatever precinct, to also respond as improved response times. In fact, we had an incident a week ago with a gentleman in his home, and he was threatening to kill himself, and it was dispatched to 2 sheriff's deputies, and Fort Benn County constables got there before
You're good.
the Fort Benn County Sheriff's deputies.
All right. Next question. Do you think the Sheriff's Department has done a sufficient job of protecting the staff and individuals in the facilities from COVID-19? Would you initiate any further measures?
Okay, could you repeat that one more time?
Yes. Do you think the Sheriff's Department has done a sufficient job of protecting the staff and individuals in the facilities from COVID-19? Would you initiate any further measures?
I'm not familiar with the entire Fort Benn County staff with respect to COVID because I'm the precinct 4 constable. But I assure you, if I'm your Fort Benn County sheriff, that COVID response will be a priority in dealing with it and to make sure each and every employee at the Fort Benn County Sheriff's Department is safe and secure. But I do know this. As of today, there are only 2 cases of COVID inside the Fort Benn County Jail, and there are in excess of 700 inmates in the Fort Benn County Jail. 0 employees within the Fort Benn County Jail, those that protect and monitor the inmates inside the Fort Benn County Jail. So I would predict, or I would say to you, that I believe that the sheriff's office, through other organizations and other Fort Bend County resources, have done an outstanding job ensuring the safety and security of not only the inmates in the jail, but also its employees.
Thank you. Mr. Fagan, your response?
My response is this. Right now at the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Department, there's deputies who had to take off in fear of having COVID. They were told to take off and do the 14 days to check because they had that scare of having the COVID virus. There was a bailiff who had to go to court, and the actual witness in that courtroom had the COVID virus. This was documented in the papers. So we must put policies in place where we must mandate every deputy to wear a mask. Mandate it. Don't make it where it's up to him or her. They only mandated it after several months after the COVID virus took place. We must be proactive in everything, not only into your safety, but the deputy's safety as well. As your next sheriff, I will let science lead us in that.
Thank you. Next question. What form of leadership do you believe the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Department needs? Mr. Fagan, you're first.
I believe the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Department needs a progressive and forward-thinking sheriff in the office for today, of what's going on today. Look, my opponent have made statements that he's the current constable of Precinct 3 and of Precinct 4, and he is. But then he'll jump and say what great things the sheriff's office is doing, and want to tell me not to bring up the sheriff's office. You can't have it both ways. Look, I'm running to be your next Fort Bend County Sheriff to bring forward thinking to the Sheriff's Department, to bring progressive policing to the Sheriff's Department, to bring community-oriented policing to the Sheriff's Department. I have the knowledge, I have the experience, and I have the education. I'm asking for your vote to be the next Fort Bend County Sheriff. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Nels, your response?
Well, I want to begin by addressing those that work CIT at the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office. If you're listening today, I think you do an outstanding job. You've responded to over 10,000 calls for service as a CIT, and I think I and all people in Fort Bend County appreciate your hard work. I don't think my opponent, maybe not so much. With respect to leadership, and what my form of leadership is, I've got 32 years in the United States Army Reserve, and I hold the rank of colonel. I've served at command level positions at not only the company, but the battalion and the brigade levels. I'm a proven leader. I'm a critical thinker. I'm a strategic level planner. Fort Bend County is one of the 10 largest sheriff's offices in Fort Bend County. So my question for Mr. Fagan would be, what supervisory experience have you gained in over 30 years of service with the Houston Police Department? Supervisory, whether sergeant, lieutenant, captain, and I'm hoping he can answer that question this evening.
Thank you. Next question. With all the negativity in the media about law enforcement, if elected, what approach would you take to encourage our current police officers to not resign and stay positive? Also, what approach would you take to recruit more law enforcement? Mr. Nels, you're first.
You know, it's a very interesting question, and I think law enforcement, not just here in Fort Bend County, but across our state and across our country, look at what's happening in some of our large metropolitan areas across our country. They see some of the civil unrest and the violence, the 2 LAPD sheriff's deputies that were gunned down in their vehicles, bullets riddling their windows. That's sad, and that can have a significant impact on recruiting efforts. But we've been very, very proactive over the last 10 to 20 years to reach out to all communities in Fort Bend County with respect to recruiting efforts, because we want our agencies and our offices to be representative of the community we serve. We have a large Indo-American population, Muslim population, Chinese, Vietnamese, all across the world, and we want to continue to encourage them to enter the law enforcement field.
Thank you. Mr. Fagan, your response.
Great question. First, let me correct something. I have the utmost respect for the sheriff deputies in all agencies at the Fort Benn County Sheriff's Department. The morale at the Fort Benn County Sheriff's Department right now is down. They are right now working over 12-hour shifts, mandatory, and overtime to fill the short manpower that they have. I'm the only one on this race that has experience in doing background investigation as a background investigator for the Houston Police Department, where I conducted background investigations on individuals trying to be employed to the Houston Police Department, on citizens and on officers. There's a thing that's called a gypsy cop. What that is this: an officer that works at one agency and does something wrong and then leaves and go to another agency because those two agencies didn't talk and they hired that person, and then that person does something bad there and then jumps to another agency. I investigated that and I stopped it at Houston Police Department as an investigator. I would do the same as your sheriff at Fort Benn County.
Thank you. Next question. Do you feel that training and preparation that the law enforcement in Fort Benn County has gone through or continues to go through is enough to handle the issues of Fort Benn County? Or do you feel that there are more programs and training that are needed to be put in place? Mr. Fagan, you're first.
Yes, there's more training that needs to be done. Look, don't take it wrong and don't be misled. I have no ill will towards any deputy or think they're doing a bad job. I'm saying that we need more training in CIT, more training in diversity to help our very diverse county. We're the most diverse county in the state of Texas, if not in the nation, but it's not reflected in the command staff. I will change that. You can say the word diversity all day long, but without inclusion, it's meaningless. I'm a person that acts, a person that's done it at my last agency I was at, and a person that will do it as your next Fort Benn County Sheriff.
Thank you. Mr. Nels, your response.
Well, I want to say this to Eric, that as the sheriff, my focus will not be on conducting background investigations. There are 829 employees at the Sheriff's Department, fine men and women, and there are people specifically qualified to handle background investigations. Because when I become your sheriff January 1, I will have other issues that are more strategic, higher operational than conducting background on investigations on civilians or potential deputies. With respect to training and preparation, I believe there's going to be some state mandated training mandates coming down through either the federal or the state that require more training in de-escalation techniques. I think it's needed, I think it's warranted, and I think it'll be one of the police reform measures that everybody across our country will come to terms with and agree with. I also think we need more equitable policing in Fort Benn County where all people are represented equally. Now, Mr. Fagan keeps mentioning command staff, things of that nature, but I hope we have an opportunity to talk a little bit about the demographics of our law enforcement agencies.
You will. Next question. How would you work to keep incarceration rates down? Mr. Nels, you're first.
I think this is one of the success stories of the current administration at the Fort Benn County Sheriff's Office, and it's to reduce recidivism rates within the jail population. And that is being done by the Fort Benn County Sheriff's Department. And I'll tell you how they're doing it. They're doing it through proactive approaches to provide training to nonviolent offenders, whether it's a welding program, HVAC program, office type training, you name it, it's there at the Fort Benn County Sheriff's Department. In fact, I think it's state of the art, and it's probably the only sheriff's office in Texas, if not the nation, that does so. And the benefit to this is once the offender or inmate's released, then there's a mechanism to monitor them and track them, find them gaining full employment so they can become productive members of society. We've proven that the recidivism rates have been lessened by about 30% due to those wonderful programs.
Thank you. Mr. Fagan, your response?
Yes, but first let me say this. As the sheriff, you're responsible for the whole department. Background investigation, homicide, sexual offenses, auto theft, gangs. You can't pick and choose. You're responsible for all of it. Now to your question. to bring it down, you have to look at all of it, totality. One way to do it, as I said earlier, bring down the number of people being arrested for non-violent offenses like marijuana, where you can cut them a ticket, give them a ticket where they can pay the fine and not place them inside the jail. You have to do that. Work with our DA and the county judge and the judges about bringing down mental illness and arresting mentally ill people. They don't belong in the county jail. They need help. We need to work with all these different entities to do that. As your sheriff, a person with knowledge about mental illness, how to de-escalate, and how to bring people together, and working with all different divisions, I will do this as your next sheriff.
Thank you. How can you, next question, how can you reduce the time law enforcement must spend in court so they can be patrolling and investigating? Mr. Fagan, you're first.
How to reduce the time how law enforcement is doing in court? Well, as the sheriff, if an officer's an investigation is called to court, that's not my privy to make that deputy come out of court. That's up to the judge and the DA and the attorneys at the time. What I can say is this: we need more deputies on the force. What I would say is this: I want to hire 800 more deputies. Fort Benn County is growing astronomically. My opponent even said that about how people are coming to Fort Benn County, and that's true, but we have to be proactive. We need 800 more deputies, hire 800 more deputies to get there. Once we hit 1 million, we'll be behind the 8 ball. We have to look forward. So we need to hire more deputies to put them on patrol. That's what I would do.
Thank you. Mr. Nels, your response?
For the people of Fort Benn County, I do not believe we want Harris County policies here in Fort Benn County, which is why you moved to Fort Benn County. Mr. Fagan's experience is in Harris County, specifically in Houston. So I'd like to go back to the question of what supervisory position or positions have you served in with your 30 years within the Houston Police Department? And I'm hoping you can answer it at your next time available. Mr. Fagan speaks, he wants to hire 800 more deputies. There are currently 829 employees to serve 825,000 residents. You are looking at a potential 96, 97% increase. So just listen to what Mr. Fagan said. He wants to hire 800 additional law enforcement officers. Do you understand the budgetary fiscal impact of doubling the Fort Benn County Sheriff's Department? You know what will happen. Fort Benn County residents will be scattered to the 4 winds and moving in counties because their taxes are going to quadruple, if not even further.
Thank you,
so,
sir.
so understand the management and the psyche of my opponent here.
Let's move on. All right. What will you do to curtail the flow and sale of drugs in Fort Benn County? Mr. Nails?
That's a great question. Reasonable question. And there is a Fort Benn County Narcotics Task Force that you alluded to earlier. And that Narcotics Task Force is made up of officers from departments from Rosenberg, Missouri City, Sugar Land, Richmond, the Fort Benn County Sheriff's Office, and I add with emphasis, the Fort Benn County District Attorney's Office. So the Fort Benn County District Attorney's Office is one of the 6 agencies that make up the Fort Benn County Joint Narcotics Task Force. I think the task force has done an outstanding job with curtailing drug activity. They've been very proactive, at least at my time in Fort Benn County as a peace officer for over 27 years serving Fort Benn County residents. I think they've done an outstanding job. And not only have they done an outstanding job, our municipal agencies across Fort Benn County working with state, federal, and other agencies to ensure Fort Benn County is not a drug haven.
Thank you. Mr. Fagan, your response.
First of all, I don't want to insult your intelligence. I'm not saying hiring 800 deputies day one. That's ridiculous. I serve as your sheriff for a 4-year term. This is something we have to work on gradually. Fort Benn County residents deserve protection. That's our #1 rule. Not worrying about the budget and things like that, it's gradual. Commissioner's Court, just because I say I want 800 officers, that's the number I'm working for. We have to be proactive and ready for it. As far as drugs, the task force right now is already having a problem about racial profiling. We can't forget that. We need to correct those problems and then move forward. Move forward on drug initiatives. Move forward in hiring more deputies to put them on the task force, doing the job correctly. As your sheriff, I will do that.
Thank you. What do you believe is Fort Bend County's biggest juvenile or at-risk youth issue? And what do you believe needs to be put into place to solve this issue? Mr. Fagan, you're first.
The biggest issue I believe is not addressing the gang problem. We have to address the gang problem and work along with the school district, reach out to them, to put together programs in the schools. One of my initiatives in my 7-point plan is a youth initiative. In this initiative, what I want to do is my deputies who are patrolling during day shift, during the 8-hour shift, is to stop at a school in their district. Stop, park in the parking lot, get out their vehicle, and walk the campus. This does two things. One, it makes the kids there at the school be more comfortable when seeing law enforcement because they'll see them on a daily basis. Another, I would hope to have the other law enforcement agencies, the municipalities and constables join in with me to do that, to reach out to our youth so they'll feel more comfortable being around law enforcement. If I'm elected your sheriff, this is one of my initiatives.
Thank you. Mr. Nels?
Well, I appreciate the clarification on the 800 deputies, Eric. You're looking at now 200 deputies per year in your first 4-year term. So that would be 800 deputies after 4 years. And I just want our viewers to understand the financial impact and the fiscal impact of doubling the sheriff's office in a 4-year term, understanding that fiscal responsibility is essential for success. With respect to youth or juveniles at risk, some of our youth, I think mental health is an issue for our youth. It's not just senior adults, middle-aged adults. I think we have mental health issues in Fort Bend County and concerns for many of our youth. So mental health would be a priority here at the Sheriff's Department, working with public-private partnerships and the other services throughout Fort Bend County to ensure we can properly address that. And then, of course, juvenile delinquency. But I will say this, the relationship that law enforcement, my office, Sheriff's Office, Sugar Land have with Fort Bend ISD, Lamar ISD, Katy ISD is strong in its collaboration.
Thank you. Let's move on to another topic now. With domestic violence and sexual assault being a major issue, do you believe that the proper measures are being taken for this issue, or do you believe there needs to be more measures taken? Mr. Nels, we'll start with you.
With respect to domestic violence, as your constable for the last 8 years, we take domestic violence very, very seriously, as does any law enforcement agency or professional here in Fort Bend County, across our state and across our nation. As your next sheriff, we will continue to partner with the Women's Shelter. We take domestic violence very, very seriously in compliance with state law. And at the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office, there's a victim liaison assigned who coordinates needs with victims. But I want our viewers to understand that there are multiple different resources available to assist with victims of domestic violence, whether it's children, men, women. There are resources available in Fort Bend County to address it. So from my perspective, I have not heard of any issues where domestic violence is taken secondhand and not a priority.
Thank you. Mr. Fagan, your response?
In my 7-point plan, that's the number 2 initiative on my plan. Domestic violence is on the rise because of COVID, what's going on right now. And we must address it and look at it head on. In my initiative, I want to work with the Women's Center. Domestic violence is one of the most least reported crimes. The reason why, sometimes it's because of embarrassment. The people feel embarrassed to come forward. what I want to do is work with places like the Women's Center, bringing in one of their workers into our department along with the detective investigating domestic violence, so they can understand certain questions that we ask, that we're not attacking them, certain questions that they can understand, that the people from the Women's Center can explain to them, that the law enforcement officers have to ask them to get the case solved. So we must open the doors to these different agencies and let the people know about it who are victims of domestic violence. Domestic violence affects the whole family.
Thank you. All right. So, Mr. Fagan, you talked about Fort Bend County as one of the most diverse counties in the nation. What are ways that the Sheriff's Department can reflect inclusivity? Also specifically on the senior command staff. Mr. Fagan?
Is by hiring people in the command staff. If you look at the Sheriff's Department command staff right now, you won't see people who look like me on that staff. We must change that. We must hire qualified people in those positions, and we have them here in Fort Bend. That was one of the reasons I ran to be your next Fort Bend County Sheriff. We must hire people of different religions, different faith, different ethnic group, so they can see that their communities in law enforcement, not just only in patrol, but in the command staff as well. As your next sheriff, I will open the doors and I will hire qualified people in those positions of all races, of all cultures, Republican, Democrat, it doesn't matter, but the qualified one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nels.
Yes, realizing Fort Bend County is one of the most diverse counties in the United States. As your next sheriff, I will bring more diversity to the ranks of the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office. I will run it very much like I do the Precinct 4 Constable's office. And I'm proud to report that close to 50% of my supervisory staff at my constable's office are minorities. With respect to the Sheriff's Office, because I did a little research to prepare myself. Of the 829 employees at the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Department, 50% of that 829 are minorities. Now, can we do better? Absolutely. Can we bring more diversity from the different ethnic groups that call Fort Bend County home, whether they're Indo-American or Muslim American? Absolutely. But I'm here to tell you, the recruiting is very, very difficult. The mother of the 22-year-old Indo-American, South Asia, whatever the case may be, she's thinking, do I want him to be a police officer, an engineer, or a doctor? And the answer is anything other than a police officer. But we're going to continue to work with these groups to encourage recruitment.
Thank you. This is a related question, so you can probably continue if you want. How do you plan to address the lack of confidence in law enforcement expressed by some, particularly younger people? What do you propose to do to develop better relationships with minority communities and to build trust with them? Mr. Nels.
Great question. And the youth of today, you have to be very proactive in reaching out to today's youth. They're very social media savvy. They understand all the social media platforms that exist. But I will say that the very successful Kids and Cops program at the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Department, they actively reach out during the school year, summertime, for youth camps for youth in Fort Bend County. They're also heavily engaged in social media to bring public safety announcements, what's happening across the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office. And it's not just the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office, it's most of your agencies here in Fort Bend County, because we all want to ensure our youth are informed, they're engaged, they feel confident and comfortable with their law enforcement officers. And I think that's extremely important. So our contact with the millennials will continue. We'll continue to build upon it so I can be a sheriff for all people.
Thank you. Mr. Fagan, your response.
I will reach out to our millennials and our youth. There's a new law called the SB 30 bill. The SB 30 bill is this. It's where individuals getting their driver's license and 9th through 12th graders have to take a class on how to act and how to deal with being stopped by a law enforcement officer. This bill is unique in that all 80,000 officers in the state of Texas also have to take this class on how to deal with an individual, especially youth, minority youth, when stopped on traffic. That's the main time law enforcement interact with any branch of the community on traffic stops. I thought it was so important that I became an instructor on that. I instruct police officers as well as the students on what to do when you encounter an officer. We have to be proactive in every aspect of law enforcement. I have an initiative. We have to look forward and think of new ideas. We can't go back and jump. Oh, I'm sorry, my time is up.
That's okay. That's okay. All right. Here's a very timely question. Do you believe that systematic racism exists in Fort Bend County? And if so, what will you do as sheriff to address it? Mr. Fagan, you're first.
Systematic racism is in law enforcement. We can't deny it. Things that's been happening across the nation, we've seen it firsthand. What we have to do is put policies in place to let people know that it's zero tolerance. I hope my opponent agrees with me on that. It has to be zero tolerance. As you can see, I am an African American. I was stopped one time here in Fort Bend County, and when I was stopped, the officer said to me, "Is this your vehicle?" And I asked him, "Is that the reason you stopped me?" And he said again, "Is this your vehicle?" And then I asked him, "Was that your probable cause to stopping me?" I wish I wouldn't have said that, because when I made that statement, that officer knew I had some part of law enforcement. He said I crossed the line without giving a signal. That wasn't true. If I would have made a complaint about it, they would have said, all he asked you was, "That's your vehicle." Being an African American, I knew that was racial profiling. You need someone in charge that understands this.
All right, thank you. Mr. Nels, your response.
As your next sheriff, I will not tolerate any form of racial discrimination, racial profiling at the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Department, period. Now, I'm hoping I can yield some of my time to Mr. Fagan to answer the one question that I've been trying to get answered since we started. That question is this: Eric, what supervisory experience have you had with your 30 years of public service with the Houston Police Department? Applaudable public service. I appreciate your public service. But what supervisory positions have you held at the Houston Police Department that qualify you to be the next sheriff?
You giving up the rest of your time?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Fagan, go ahead and answer that question, then we'll throw it back to you.
That question, I am going to answer it, but it's in my 2-minute closing.
He's asking you now, so you can go
okay.
ahead and use it now, and you can talk about that if you want to later.
Look, I was the president of the second largest union in the Houston Police Department. As the union president, I negotiated a $780 million budget. As the president of the union, I represented officers in complaints where I had to sit down and speak with chiefs of police, captains, sergeants, all along the line. Also, I was on the mayor's protection detail, the fourth of the mayor of the fourth largest city. Doing that, I gave directives to chiefs of police, sheriffs, and constables in different cities, states, and countries we went into. I have the experience. Don't be fooled or be swept away about this question like he's trying to do, saying that I don't have experience in command. I do have that experience. I've done it, I will do it, and I will be the best sheriff of Fort Bend County if you give me that opportunity.
Mr. Nels, your response to that?
I will be more succinct with my question, Eric, and I'm hoping that you can answer this. Eric, you had over 30 years with the Houston Police Department. You were Officer of the Year 3 times. Officer of the Year. There are other different programs that recognize supervisory leadership, command leadership, and so on and so forth. So I'll try to be more succinct this time. Eric, did you ever take a promotional exam in your 30+ years at the Houston Police Department?
Yes, I have. I took the sergeant test on 3 different occasions. I died on the list. We have over 5,000 officers with the Houston Police Department. I died on the list number 1 the first time. I died on the list number 2 the second time. I died on the list number 5 the last time I took the test. I did more as the president of the union, did more as on the protection detail of the 4th largest city of the department than some sergeants, some captains, some chiefs. So you ask me about my managerial perspective, I have that.
So I appreciate you answering that question.
Let's get back to this. So I'm going to give him a chance. Do you have a question for Mr. Nels?
Yes, Mr. Nels, you said that there was awards for the Officer of the Year award, also for the managerial. The Officer of the Year award has nothing to do with rank. It has to do with the officer's performance on the street. You've been in law enforcement for over 21 years. Have you ever been nominated for Officer of the Year? Have you ever won that award? Let me finish my question. I appreciate your service in the military. I appreciate it. You've done a great job to protect us. I'm not knocking it. I'm not knocking your law enforcement experience. But I'm asking you, have you ever won the Officer of the Year award?
Well, to clarify, and there was multiple questions in there. Number one, I have close to 30 years of law enforcement experience, 27 of those years right here in Fort Benn County. No, I have never received the Officer of the Year through the 100 Club as you have. But what I think what you did for me is you answered the question that I've been trying to get through since we started. You never promoted at the Houston Police Department, which means you never supervised or managed law enforcement officers at the Houston Police Department. Now, I applaud your efforts with the union. Great work. I appreciate your efforts with the Super Bowl. I appreciate all the things you talk about on your website. That is great work, but it is not supervision or management. When you enter HPD as an officer and you retire with over 30 years of service as an officer, it leads me to believe that you weren't trying to shape your career to lead the Fort Benn County Sheriff's Office at one point. I think the residents of Fort Benn County demand supervisory and management experience to lead one of the 10 largest law enforcement agencies in in the state of Texas. And I have that. I'm the rank of colonel in the United States military, which means the next promotion would be general officer. I have that experience, and that's what differentiates, Eric, you and I, that supervisory management experience.
All right, Mr. Fagan, let me give you a question that's going to basically allow you to answer that. Do you have the experience to plan strategically for this large county?
Yes, I do. Being the president, like he said, of the union, I gave directives to officers. Being the president of the union, I gave directives to the command staff at our agencies for the budget of 700 officers. I would like to ask the constable this, since he asked me questions. Let me return the favor. Constable Nels, when you ran to be the constable and when your brother ran to be sheriff, weren't you an officer at that time? So by your very statement, oh, you weren't an officer when you ran? What were you?
I was the rank of sergeant with Sugar Land Police.
And your brother?
My twin brother, when he ran for sheriff, he had been the elected constable for 8 years, 2 terms.
Yeah, but before he ran, he was an officer.
Budgetary experience.
So you saying what the state law says was qualified person to run for sheriff doesn't equate to what you want a person to do to run for sheriff?
Great question.
Let's let him answer the question.
It's reason, Eric. And what I want to emphasize to the viewers and to you, Eric, I believe and feel that the voters here in Fort Benn County want their sheriff to have some supervisory management experience. You, Mr. Fagan, do not have that with over 30 years at the Houston Police Department. So you're ill-informed. I was a sergeant when I ran for constable back in 2011 and took office January 1 of 2012. And now I've been serving as the constable for the last 8 years.
All right. Mr. Fagan, let's get back to our questions. What are your top short-term and long-term priorities for the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Department?
Top priority, number one, is to rescind that 911 order that was issued so that the calls to go to the nearest officer to get to the citizen. Long term is to bring up the morale at the Sheriff's Department with the deputies. All deputies, no matter where they work at, patrol, the courts, or the jail, should feel like they are the backbone of the Sheriff's Department and should be respected as such. Also, bring progressive policing to Fort Bend County and community policing to Fort Bend County, to bring minorities into our command staffs so people can see and our youth can see people who look like them in those positions, not just on patrol. My opponent is trying to say I don't have experience in command situation. It's just not the experience that he's expecting. I have a stellar career at the Houston Police Department, where I have chiefs of police who are endorsing me.
Thank you. Mr. Nels, your response to that question.
I have 4 priorities laid out when I become your sheriff, January 1. And first one is crime prevention programs and technological advancements. As I talked about earlier, body-worn cameras. As Constable, we currently have body-worn cameras, and we will bring body-worn cameras to the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office. Number 2, a strict zero-tolerance policy towards discrimination or any racial profiling. It will not happen, and it will not be tolerated as your next sheriff. 3, promoting mental health awareness and education programs to keep our community informed about its effect on crime. As I stated earlier, there are 12 great men and women, professional deputies at the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office that are a part of the crisis intervention team under stressful situations each and every day, doing great work for you, the people of Fort Bend County. And 4, fiscal responsibility, to keep our Sheriff's Office within its operating budget and accountable to taxpayers. You're looking at a budget in excess of $79 million.
Thank you. Next question. What measures would you propose to increase transparency? Mr. Nels, you're first.
Well, as I stated earlier, there's always room for improvement. Now, I'm the Constable of Precinct 4, and there's transparency in my office. I'm going to make the assumption there's transparency at the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office and all law enforcement offices within Fort Bend County, because I cannot provide you with any specific data to indicate there's no transparency. But I assure you this, as your next sheriff, I will make myself accessible to each and every person in Fort Bend County. I will ensure you that the command staff and subordinate leaders working under the sheriff are also transparent and, equally as important, accountable. Accountability is extremely important. But if you have a well-run organization with good policies and best practices, transparency will be the fruit of all that coming together.
Thank you. Mr. Fagan, your response?
Yes. Let me give you a direct answer to that and what to do to make it more transparent. At the Houston Police Department, I was a mediator and facilitator in the ADR division, Alternative Dispute Resolution, a section of IAD, Internal Affairs. I want to bring mediation to Fort Bend County. What that is this. When you have a complaint against a deputy at Fort Bend County, you and the deputy will sit down with a mediator, a neutral person, to discuss that issue. Because sometimes when an officer is on the street, when a deputy is on the street doing a scene, they don't have time to explain what they're doing or what they did or didn't do, because they have a radio and they may be called to another scene and the citizens feel like they were misunderstood. Mediation opened the doors to the public, to law enforcement. Let's do this. And that's what I will do as your next sheriff, to open the doors and make it more transparent.
Thank you.
Rayhan, may I
Yes.
comment on his 7-point plan that he's addressing?
Can you do that in your closing?
Well, I think the 7-point plan, which is Mr. Fagan's platform for running as the sheriff. And what I would like Mr. Fagan to answer is, as I look at his 7-point plan, I'm hoping that he can answer, give me 1 point of your 7-point plan that's not currently being done by the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office. Because as I look at it, I would think you cut and paste it off the Fort Bend County website and put it into your 7-point plan, because your active shooter terrorist attacks already being done, domestic violence already being addressed.
Let's give him the chance to answer that question then.
My 7-point plan did not get cut from the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Department. I created it, I wrote it. So I know that. That's his assumption. It's not true. The domestic terrorist attacks and terrorist attacks is training that I got as being on the Mayor's Protection Detail, working with our terroristic team at the Houston Police Department. What I'm saying I want to do is this. I want to have all law enforcement agencies in Fort Bend County working together, training together. If they're doing it now, great, that's fine. Let's enhance it. We can't look at what happened in the past. We have to go forward. And that's what I want to do. And that's what my 7-point plan does.
Okay. Do you have a question for Mr. Nels you want to ask at this time? I'm trying to give you equal time.
Besides saying what you, continuing what your brother is doing at the Sheriff's Department, what are your plans being the next sheriff of Fort, well, I will be elected, if you were elected as the next sheriff.
And Eric, I appreciate your response on the last question with respect to your 7 points. And I respectfully appreciate the fact that you indicated that they may already occur at the Sheriff's Department. You just want to enhance or improve upon it. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, great. Because I wanted to make sure that the fine men and women at the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Department don't think that they're not doing a good job each and every day and the programs that currently exist are not effective, because I think they're effective. As I alluded to a few minutes earlier, Eric, the priorities will be crime prevention programs, technological advancements, about the body-worn cameras. We're going to talk about the zero tolerance towards any form of discrimination, Eric, and I think you and I can agree to that. Any form of racial profiling will not be tolerated. I think you and I can agree on that. And promoting the mental health awareness, which I think is critically important considering the state of our community, the state of our country, and the fiscal responsibility. Now, this is where you and I may not agree, Eric. The fiscal responsibility of a budget in excess of $79 million. Eric, that's a lot of money. In today's environment.
Good. That's, I mean, we can do this all day.
Okay.
But there are people who have questions.
Very good.
So instead of, I think you've gotten a chance to ask each other quite a few questions. So let's try to get back to it. According to data provided by the Fort Bend County Constable Precinct 3, there are over 240 individual gangs with over 2,000 total members residing within the Fort Bend County. If elected sheriff, what measures would you ensure that are put in place to document gangs and their members, as well as investigate gang-related crimes? Mr. Nels, you're first.
We'll have investigators investigate the crime. So if we do have gang-related activity and it's reported, we'll investigate the crime. In fact, it was a few weeks ago, there was some tagging taking place in one of our communities north of the precinct, and we went out and we addressed it. Now, the Precinct 3 Constable, let me just make a comment about our Precinct 3 Constable. And it was addressed earlier with some of our racial profiling. Now, the Precinct 3 Constable has endorsed Mr. Fagan. And Mr. Fagan touts and promotes that endorsement on his social media, website, you name it. And you're proud of that, I would think, Eric?
Yes, I am.
Now, do you realize his 2019 racial profiling stats, Eric? What percent of the traffic stops conducted by Constable Thompson in his office in 2019 were Hispanic or Latino? What percent? Can you guess?
Not gonna guess.
If you had to.
Not going to
All
guess.
right, that's good.
48%.
All right, Mr. Fagan, you can go ahead and respond to that question now.
I'm very proud of my endorsement from Constable Wayne Thompson. He's doing an outstanding job as the constable there in Precinct 3. As far as the question about minorities and things like that, let's look at the facts. Let's look at the statistics. The statistics says you're 8 times more likely to be stopped in Fort Benn County if you're an African American, 3 times more likely if you are Asian American or Hispanic American. These are facts. The task force that the sheriff's office is over is being charged with racial profiling. That's something that is a fact. Like I said before, you can't say, I'm the constable and let's talk about what I'm doing there, then jump over to the sheriff's department is doing great right here. I'm not knocking the deputies there. I'm saying we should do better. And to say that you shouldn't have a plan, you want a new plan as the sheriff.
Okay, thank you. All right, this is something that I don't know if we've touched on yet. Social media is constantly growing, therefore leading to more bullying and harassment online in our youth, which therefore leads to suicide, which we've talked about briefly, which is the highest cause of death in the United States. As the sheriff, how do you begin to address this problem? Mr. Fagan, you're first.
If on my youth initiative platform on my website, and I thank you for bringing that up, I have a youth initiative. My plan is this. Also, I told you about the officers walking around. I want to work with the different school districts, the 7 different school districts here in Fort Benn County, the ISDs, and ask them to work along with us by placing a lockbox in the schools where students can put in anonymous notes inside that lockbox. And the deputies, when they get out to patrol the area there, they can open it and see. Look, a lot of the school shootings that happen because of kids being bullied on there, being bullied. And this also goes on with what I'm talking about, addressing mental illness. If one of his classmates put a note in there and says, my friend has asked me not to come to school on this date, we can address that. We can get that student before something acts. I want to be proactive. This is being proactive. Please look at my 7-point plan.
Thank you.
May I
Mr. Mills,
answer that
your
one?
response, yes.
Okay, one could argue today across our country that social media is an existential threat to our country. For the viewers out there, if you haven't had the opportunity to watch the movie, I believe it's Netflix, it's called The Social Dilemma, and you look at its impact on youth, young children committing suicide as a result of the impact of social media and the bullying. Now, when we were growing up, Eric, and I'm sure you and I, we were bullied probably as grade schoolers, middle schoolers, maybe even high school. But the bullying today is 24/7 because it happens on their phone, it happens through social media networks, and they never get away from it. We used to be bullied at school, but once we left school, bullying no longer took place. But Fort Bend ISD, the school district, has a police agency, a very robust police agency that patrol the schools, whether they're elementary, middle schools, or high schools. My 3 children, teenagers, attend schools, and I feel safe and secure, and I feel they should feel safe and secure because of the leadership by our school districts ensuring they're protected while in school each and every day.
Mr. Fagan?
We must enhance that. We can't just leave it to the school districts to do it. We must help them work hand in hand. Look at my initiative, the youth initiative. What I'm saying is this: have an officer while on patrol, 8-hour shift, to stop at the school, get out and walk around, put a lockbox in the school. Like I said, a lot of school bullying and things like that, even school shootings, when the person does things like that, we can address it by having that note there. We have to be proactive in all manners of law enforcement. I've been in Fort Benn County for over 29 years. And as my opponent knows, I hope he does knows, part of Houston is in Fort Benn County. I filed charges in Fort Benn County in my 34 years in law enforcement. So I'm not a stranger to Fort Benn County. I've been here 29 years.
Rehan, you started with
Yes,
him on that
you're
question,
right.
so
I'm
if
going
I
to
can
give you. I'm
rebut
going to
that.
give you an extra minute. Yes.
And I want to pay compliments to the specific school districts in Fort Bend County, whether it's Fort Bend ISD or Lamar ISD, Katy ISD. And they have police officers working in the schools each and every day throughout the school year. But I want to emphasize that the collaboration that exists in Fort Bend County with the law enforcement agencies, we work in a collaborative way. There's training conducted, simulations training conducted each and every year to ensure our schools are safe. Now, our Chief of Police for the Fort Bend Independent School District, David Ryder, there was an initiative a couple years ago through a referendum to sort of target harden our schools. And that referendum passed, and our schools have been able to sort of target harden to restrict or minimize the likelihood of an active shooter from entering the school to give law enforcement a little more time. So I want to let your viewers know there are proactive measures in place to address school safety in Fort Bend County.
Thank you. We had a lot of questions, but unfortunately we have to close. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to give your closing statements in order of your name on the ballot. Mr. Nels, why would someone vote for you for sheriff?
Well, number one, I want to thank the Fort Bend Chamber and Eric for participating, and Rehan for your professionalism as the moderator. I truly thank you for that. And equally as important, I thank the viewers out there tonight who have spent the last 90 minutes listening to Eric and I, some back and forth, but talk about the plans that we have at the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Department. But I will say this to you. I am uniquely qualified to serve as your sheriff. I think this evening we drew some distinct differences between my opponent and I. And that one significant difference is supervisory management experience. I've been a supervisor in law enforcement for over 20 years. And I've served in our U.S. Armed Forces for over 32 years, holding commands at the company, battalion, and brigade levels. And why is that important? It's important because it's leadership. No matter what the organization, it boils down to leadership. I have that leadership. I've been trained through my experience, my education, and I do hold 2 master's degrees, one in public administration and one in strategic studies. But I think my education, my training, and my military experience at the strategic level, conducting deliberate planning, qualifies me to serve as your next sheriff. And secondly, I've been serving Fort Bend County residents for over 27 years as a police officer, and I understand Fort Bend County. I can get to Simonton, I know where Orchard is, I can get to Fulshire, I know where the Katy ISD is, and all the other agencies, and many of the law enforcement leaders and municipal leaders, whether they're council members, school board members, because it's a collaborative approach to be successful in law enforcement.
Thank you.
I thank you.
Mr. Fagan, your closing statement.
Hello, I am Eric Fagan, and let me tell you why you should vote for me to be your next Fort Bend County Sheriff. Education, Master's in Juvenile Forensic Psychology, 34 years of law enforcement experience, police union president helping to negotiate a $780 million budget, 3-time recipient of the Officer of the Year Award, one of the highest awards given in law enforcement. Worked on the mayor's protection detail for the mayor of the 4th largest city in the U.S., giving directives to chiefs of police, sheriffs, constables, and their officers in different cities, states, and countries we entered. Worked with the NFL security team, state, local, and federal law enforcement officials in protecting over 1 million visitors to the Super Bowl 51. I want to unify our very diverse community. As president of the 2nd largest union, I started programs to help bridge the gap between the police and the community. For that, I was named President Emeritus. Fort Bend County needs a sheriff, now more than ever, who is forward-thinking and progressive, who will work with our DA to help stop human trafficking and the gangs, work with our county judge, who will put public safety first and get body cameras by applying for federal grants like other law enforcement agencies does. A sheriff who will lift the morale of the sheriff's department deputies who are currently working mandatory working 12-hour shifts and overtime to help with the manpower shortage. I'm Eric Fagan. I'm asking for your support and your vote to be your next Fort Benn County Sheriff. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nels and Mr. Fagan, for being with us this evening. Thank you for all of our questions from our audience and our media members who provided those questions. This concludes our Fort Benn County Sheriff's Candidates Forum. Let me remind you of some important dates. Early voting begins tomorrow. It will be from October 13th through the 30th. Election day, of course, is November 3rd, 2020. For more information on voting, you can visit www.fortbennchambervotes.com. Thank you for tuning in, and be sure to vote early. Thank you.
Thank you.